Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Misconceptions. I am so thankful that Elke agreed to share her story with me today. Elke, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here.
So, some of you may be familiar with Elke from the work that she does in a new initiative called Tikvaseinu. So, let's start with that. Tell me about this amazing new program that you have launched in the Monsey area.
Okay. Thank you. So Tikvaseinu was born out of my own difficult experience with a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder, which I didn't know that fancy name back when I was struggling, but now we have correct terminology. So because of my struggles and because of my difficulty, um, and we could go through the process of that, but the reality that I did not have access to awareness or access to proper care was it really prolonged the whole struggle for me and the whole difficulty. And I just had this passion that once I did get better and get back on my feet, that would change. That at least my community where I live in Monsey would be able to have easy access to care and easy access to correct information. That was very important to me.
I think that, when you and I met originally as a part of, I don't even remember exactly where and when we met, but I know that when I met you, it was such a sense of I have this responsibility almost to
Yeah.
bring this education, bring this knowledge, bring this awareness. This cannot happen to more women that you suffered, and you want to make sure that other women do not suffer. And so I see you as an advocate, as a person who's like kind of like raising the torch on perinatal moods. And I think that, you and I have spoken about this idea of if I ask you how many organizations are out there to treat child, that support families dealing with childhood cancers, we can rattle off a list of Jewish organizations specifically. But if I ask you to rattle off a list of organizations that are there to support families in perinatal mood disorders, the list is incredibly small, like less than one hand. And knowing that, it's really startling because we know that this is something that, in according to the data, we're talking about 1 in 5 to 7 women will experience a perinatal mood disruption. We know that probably at a clinical level, and we know that men, their partners, spouses are also experiencing these issues. At somewhere around 1 in 10 men will have a perinatal mood disorder, which might even be a surprising like terminology for some people who are listening to this. Like, what do you mean? Men get this too? And we'll talk about that. But I think that it doesn't make sense to me in a community where we value families and large families and have many children. How is it that we don't have 24 organizations to support when we know the prevalence is high? So, what do you think it is that is holding us back? Or why do you think this is the thing that we're having such a hard time pushing out into awareness and education and services? Like, why this thing? What do you think is happening?
Such a good question. Partially, I think the whole mental health world in general is not such a pretty place. A lot of the chesed organizations that we have for our community and the From community is amazing on what we provide, but there is a certain attractiveness to being able to help a family with a sick child or show up at the hospital. I remember doing that as a teenager. Like there was a little bit of a sparkle.
Mm,
I hate to use that because it's difficult times people are dealing with, but there is something attractive about the organization itself. Mental health is a much harder space to be in, and women just don't want to talk about it. And without the language, without the conversation around it, I have to imagine that's what's holding people back from getting out there and changing the conversation
yeah.
around this
Yeah.
struggle.
Yeah, I think shame and stigma and also and like all of those words gets thrown in here.
Yeah.
I think that your willingness to even have this conversation is also courageous because I think that I know that I've spoken to many women who said, I mean, I want you to tell the story, but I'm not going to be ready to tell my story because, all the reasons. So
And what I
tell
found
me, yeah.
interesting about that also is that we give a lot of attention to the shame and stigma. When I reflect back to my own journey, the shame and stigma was one part. The other part was not even knowing what was going on. So even once you're able to process the shame and say, forget it, I need help, I don't care. I'm going to just reach out to whoever I can. Now what?
Right. Where do I go? Where do I start? Okay, let's start with education and awareness. So tell me where you want to start. Where do you want to begin your story?
I think I just want to know that I'm able to, that this could be of value to other people. And I think for me, that first part of the journey, the first few months, not even a few weeks, first few months of just complete confusion. What's going on here, right? So Baruch Hashem was after my sixth child. I had never suffered before. I had the typical postpartum blues every once in a while. If you want to talk about the difference of that, but we could talk about that also. But I did okay. And then comes this beautiful baby boy who was just, I was 37. It was really exciting. The first 2 weeks were blissful. It was beautiful. It was amazing. And then it wasn't. Everything started to just tank. And the biggest piece of confusion for me was, what's going on? Why am I feeling this way? Why am I so nauseous? Why can't I eat? Why can't I sleep? What is going on? So that parsha, that time period of the confusion, was one of the more difficult ones because we just didn't know where to turn. And what I also found during that time period, which was difficult, that even when I started using the words or the language, could this be what they talk about when they say postpartum depression? The people around me were very quick to say, no, that's not what you have. You just have a lot of stress in your life right now. There are, lots of things going on in the family, good things and difficult things, simchos and struggles. So you don't have postpartum depression. You're just overwhelmed. You're just stressed. And upon reflection, that was really not helpful. Now, it didn't come from a bad place, but it just came from a lack of knowledge. But that concept of being afraid to even say, this could be something, let's look into it, rather than, no, it's just stress. And so many women who I've spoken to over the years will go to that also. No, this can't be anything related to a mood disorder. I just had a really difficult pregnancy or a really complicated delivery. And we like to hang out there in that space. It's like a safer space to hang out. And it wasn't safer because it really held me back from getting the care I needed also.
What were some of your symptoms? I love how you just started the conversation around symptoms with, why am I so nauseous? Right? Because if I said to somebody, symptoms of depression and anxiety postpartum, we wouldn't really be talking about more of the somatic or the physical. We would be talking about, I was sad, I was moody, I was emotional, I was depressed feeling, or hopeless, helpless. And you went with nausea. And I so appreciate that, because that is sometimes how it presents itself. It's like, I am so nauseous that I cannot eat. What were some of the other symptoms that you experienced?
I was incredibly somatic. Like, I like that word because that was me. It was very, very physical for me. Very unsettled feeling, like that pit in the stomach. I did not know terminology then. I did not know that was anxiety. I just knew that for some reason I could not relax. I had this jittery feeling for the first time in my life. I had these vicious panic attacks where I couldn't sit still. I was pacing the house because there was this incredible sense of panic within me. But if I were to think of the two most overwhelming symptoms, it was the inability to eat and the inability to sleep. That took over completely. And it's a very vicious cycle when you can't eat, right? Because it feeds on itself, so to speak. So I was having a very hard time functioning because I was just feeling so ill. I felt ill. That's what it was. It was so physical for me that it didn't make sense to me that it could be something emotional.
And do you remember saying to people, like, something's just not right? Or do you remember having more words than that?
Yes. And I remember actually a conversation I had with a friend where I said, like a week after you give birth and you're in the grocery store when you don't belong there, but you're there anyway, and you're just looking at all the cereals and you feel this overwhelm of like, which cereal? I need to get home. I'm dizzy. I'm like, it's 2 months later, it's 3 months later, and that's how I feel.
Every day.
I just, I couldn't get grounded. Everything felt overwhelming. Everything felt crushing.
Were you at the time able to take care of the baby?
So in the very beginning, I was able to do everything I was previously able to do. I was very fortunate. We had a baby nurse because we were also planning bar mitzvah at that time. So I do remember at 4 weeks postpartum where I was still pretty much okay. And that's when the nurse was supposed to leave. But somehow inside me, I told my husband, she can't go. She just can't go. She just can't go. So I did have a lot of help with the baby, but I really was able, on her days off, I was able to care for him. I was caring for the family. I was cooking, but I was fighting for that. I was fighting for that sense of normalcy and that sense of I'm really okay. I could do everything. Everything's fine.
Did anybody ask you, are you okay? Like, do you remember anybody noticing that something was wrong?
No, no. And even to the point where it was after my 6 week checkup already, where I went back saying, something's wrong, something's wrong. Where even then it was kind of just severe nausea, it's probably a food allergy. I was trying to tell the people around me something, a message, something, and no, I didn't feel like it was heard.
Wow. Which also tells us, one of the things that I know Karen Kleiman talks about is this idea that when somebody walks into their office that is very well, well coiffed, like very well put together, well dressed, they're actually of greater concern for her safety and her wellness because she is working so hard to keep it together, to pretend everything's okay, and is trying to convince herself and you, whoever you are, that I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay. And it sounds like that really is what you were experiencing.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because it's like both sides of the coin. Exactly that. I had a relationship with a therapist at that point, and I remember walking into her office saying, I don't have postpartum depression, but I'm struggling. And exactly, the wig was on, the makeup was on, like everything was as it should be. But at the same time, I was calling for help, but I was also saying, but I'm really okay. So it was both. Yes, I was definitely holding on to a sense of normalcy. There's no question.
And when did I'm wondering about the sleep. Did anybody say to you, hey, listen, lack of sleep is really unsafe, dangerous. We've got to make sure that we're getting you some sleep. Did anybody notice that as like, this is not safe anymore?
No.
Okay.
No, safety was not brought up. No.
No. And do you remember like how many days it was that you went without sleep or like how many hours a night you were getting? And the reason I'm picking at this is because this is such an important like component of wellness and lack of safety when we have women who are like, I just wasn't able to sleep, like or I'm not sleeping okay, or I'm not sleeping well. And when we watch that being dismissed as like, yeah, because you have a new baby, but we also didn't remember to hear that she had a baby nurse and she could have been sleeping and wasn't able to sleep, and it's agitating her, right? There's a
Right.
distress in this. So
Right.
what do you remember?
And there's a certain, I'm just remembering also with the other kids, when you nurse that baby and put that baby back into the rocker next to your bed or in the crib, normally a woman conks out. There's an exhaustion in between feeds. So when you're up at night in between feeds, that's not a good sign.
Right.
I
Right.
think that I was so nervous about not sleeping even 1 or 2 nights that I went straight to my internist and said, you need to give me something to sleep. I didn't say you need to give me something because I'm struggling with postpartum depression. I just said, I'm not sleeping and I must sleep. I'm a person who always needed a lot of sleep. This is not going to work for me. So it was kind of like, it's almost like an octopus with a bunch of different legs, like little individual things happening, but no umbrella of, okay, honey, this is postpartum depression. This is what you need to do. This is who you need to call.
Right. Nobody looked at the full picture. Nobody saw the full picture of what you were dealing with.
No, no.
And how did things progress?
That's really, I remember probably like one really big turning point was Pesach time. So the baby was born in November. I started suffering probably in January. So we're already at Pesach. So it's a long time of holding it together by
So
string.
we're talking just timeline wise, we're talking like March, April, for those who
Yeah.
might not be familiar with Pesach.
Yes, excellent point. I knew enough that I wasn't going to try to make Pesach that year. It's a very physically demanding holiday. And I was lucky enough that my parents were able to open their home to my family. So that was a good thing. But for some reason, in the middle of the holiday, I spiraled so quickly. It could have just been the lack of structure, the lack of, because I was having such a hard time eating and I was down to eating like crackers and whatever non-Pesach food it was. So I really wasn't eating, and anything I tried to eat, it's like, try eating a hard-boiled egg when you're nauseous.
Sure.
It's not pretty. That got scary. That got scary. I don't mean to be vague. It's hard to describe what scary meant. That literally was the first time where the words "I cannot function" actually came to be, where there was no way I could take care of anybody at that point.
And how did you make that known? Like, how did you move from I've been tolerating and coping and doing what I can to keep my head just enough above the water, even though I'm drowning? How did you
Um,
transition?
I think that it was so, at that point, even visual. I had family members around me, siblings that were there. I was shaking so violently and also vomiting the food that I was trying to eat. It just became visual, I think, at that point. Like, she is really not okay. She is really not okay. And I think it was also the first time where I told my husband, like, you cannot go to work today. I'm just, I'm just not okay. I'm not okay. And that's really when the most difficult segment, so to speak, opened up for me, because I did see a psychiatrist at that point. And this could be a whole conversation on its own, but I really, really was put on a very difficult medication journey, so to speak. I don't like saying that to people because it gives a bad reputation to medication, which is totally not the case. The only reason why I really recovered was because of the right medication, but because I didn't necessarily access the right help at the right time, it just exacerbated things terribly.
How
Yeah.
would you do things different if knowing that piece of it in terms of medication and a medication challenges? Would you do something differently, or would you encourage women to do things differently?
It's really important that women have access to the right care. So there's a whole big world of psychiatry out there, and there's a whole big world of, qualified social workers, therapists, psychologists, but you need to be in the hands of a skilled perinatal mental health counselor and a reproductive psychiatrist. It's too dangerous, so to speak, to play around and try to see, experiment here and there. You need somebody who understands what's going on,
Mhm.
because it's we are the captain of the ship, so to speak. We can't mess around. It's too delicate.
And there's a new baby here also, right? There's multiple. I think that's one of the things that I think speaks the most to me in this idea of perinatal psychiatry. When pregnant, there are two patients in the room. And I think even postpartum, there are two patients plus the other children that you had, right? As
Yes.
well as a spouse and a family that you're trying to kind of navigate around. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. How long do you feel like it took once you got medication on board and kind of navigated your way through the ups and downs of that? When did you begin to feel better?
I'm going to say it was when I got on the right medication. So that would be August. The baby's
Wow.
9 months at that point. Um, from August until February, that was when I started to climb out of it. And I say that also because I wish women would understand that the quicker they get their help, the quicker they're open to understanding what's going on, the recovery doesn't have to be so difficult. It was so drawn out for me that to recover, to climb out of that black hole was so challenging. So it was months. It wasn't like, oh, 4 to 6 weeks later, you start feeling better because you're on the right medication. It was months, months. So I was fully back to myself when he was 16 months old.
Wow. What did you notice first changed for you when you started the good medication, the right medication?
A certain level of functionality where it's vague again, but it was a certain groundedness. I was able to eat. I wasn't going to experiment with sleep. I was still taking sleeping aids at that point. I was terrified of not sleeping. So it was more of waking up in the morning and saying, I can get up and get the kids out to school today. I can place a grocery order today. It was really baby steps. Whereas previous to that, it was just trying not to drown. It wasn't proactively doing anything helpful for the family. It was just trying not to sink. So that was the shift.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Like the process, I'm assuming you continued with therapy at some point, right? Like you were with a counselor that supported you.
So I ended up switching counselors in middle, and it was just interesting how she was actually a counselor for one of my children, but she saw what was going on,
Mm.
and she extended help, and she said, you need to be, supported by somebody when you go through this. Like, this is not something you should be doing alone. She ended up really, really being a great sense of support for me. And also, upon reflection, it became more and more obvious to me what the support needed to be. I wasn't going through intense therapy at that point. It was really just somebody helping me navigate my day-to-day life as I was trying to recover. Learning how to do carpool again. I had to learn how to do carpool again, which was really interesting to me because it was years of navigating insane carpool lines at my kids' schools, plural. But now I was in a position where I had to learn the skills of how to do that again. How do I pull into a parking lot without getting completely overwhelmed and panic stricken? That's what we worked on together.
Wow. Wow. So she understood. She really understood. I'm wondering about the diagnosis, meaning I think this is one of the places that I feel so important to understand that if you just, what you just described to me doesn't necessarily sound like depression. And yet it's the terminology that we saying, is this depression? Is this depression? Am I depressed? Right? How do you understand your own experience in terms of it being depression, anxiety, something else? And again, you don't need to share with me the final diagnosis, but just in terms of people understanding that, first of all, depression doesn't always look like I'm under my covers in bed and I can't get out of bed. Right. I'm wondering how you kind of capture or encapsulate your own experience when you look at the symptoms and the experience. What do you think about what happened?
So it's interesting because I do remember with the psychiatrist that I ended up with finally, who was the person that helped me get to my recovery. I remember, so this is months in, where I did start to have some terminology where I diagnosed myself. I said, I think I have postpartum anxiety. And we went through my symptoms and we started treatment. And based on the treatment, he actually said, no, I think the underlying, what's the word, the initial, I'm losing my words.
It's okay.
The diagnosis is really depression, and anxiety was secondary to that. I wouldn't have known that. I thought that feeling of overwhelm, that feeling of like, I can't walk into a grocery store, everything's going to come crashing down on me. I would have thought that was complete anxiety. He had reasoning to point out that that was actually more, signs of depression. But I wasn't really so hung up on the difference between the two. It was definitely in the category of postpartum depression. There's no question. Yeah, that is exactly where I ended up. And it's an interesting point also. I remember when people started actually finally saying this must be postpartum depression, I felt so ill at that point where I then became convinced, no, I don't have that, because that is something you can get better from. There's no getting better from this. So now they're misdiagnosing me. I went through a stage where, is this postpartum depression? Trying to convince them that it's not. Now people are saying it is. And I'm saying, no, you don't realize what's going on here, because there is just no coming back from this. That was a hard time. That was a very hard time, because there was a real inner belief that this is my new reality. Whatever happened to you, this is your new reality. So all those people who are saying you're going to get better, they don't understand.
Because part of that would have been acknowledging that this is, well, part of it, I think, again, awareness and knowledge about like, it actually can be this bad and be a perinatal mood disorder and be a postpartum depression, anxiety. It can be this bad and I can also get better. But like that awareness.
No, and
happen.
that voice that you just used, that voice of confidence and knowledge, I didn't have exposure to that. So until I actually was put in touch with Tamar Gottlieb of Yad Rachel, that's when that voice of knowledge and direction came forward. But without that confident voice, it's like an ocean of confusion and loneliness, right? That was another piece that and I always say, it's not that I don't want other women to suffer from postpartum depression. We can't avoid that. But they shouldn't have to suffer unnecessarily with all the secondary feelings of isolation and confusion and loneliness. Those are really hard things to feel.
Sure.
It's bad enough to have to go through the depression itself. Those extra layers are just make it
also,
so.
And I think that you're also like, it sounds like you also had to like almost convince people, not intentionally, but you had to convince them just how bad it really was. Probably like, because you were able to put on that shake delivery, the wig every morning. You got into that carpal line with the panic attack. Like you did the job. And so it's almost like until people who are the closest with you were actually able to see the physical manifestation, it wasn't until that point was your voice actually loud enough or listened to enough to say, this is really bad. Like, I'm really not okay. And I think that that's, if I could highlight one line to me that is so crucial, that when a woman says, anybody, but a woman says, I'm not myself, something's wrong, I'm not okay, we really need to start asking 100 more questions and really believe her, versus saying, no, it's just overwhelmed. It's just stress. It's just new baby. Oh, get used to it, honey. That's what it means to have a newborn, right? Like you're never going to sleep again. But like, we don't listen when someone says, I'm not okay. And I think that's where, so much of this trajectory could have been different if someone had heard you and say, wait, tell me more about what that means. Describe that to me. Right.
And I think there's even a step before other people hearing, or I don't know, you could tell me the trajectory of that. But myself, anytime I'm really not okay, you're fine. That was my inner voice of pull it together. Try a little harder. You got this. Just fight through it. You're really okay. So even encouraging women to listen to their own voice first.
Absolutely.
And it was so damaging actually for me months into this, where somebody of real influence in my community actually came over to me and said, if you would just decide that this would be finished, it would be.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like
wow.
I always talk to my children about the concept of not allowing people's words to really, no one woke up this morning with the intention of saying something hurtful to you, right? We just try, it's not only giving people benefit of the doubt, it's also just like not always being so sensitive to what everybody says. But if I think about those 16 months, that one statement was so damaging to me because it was confirmation of what my inner belief was. And just people shouldn't say that.
Don't say that. Rule number one, do not say that. You can, yeah, that exactly. That inner voice of, if I could just white knuckle my way through, if I could, that I have control. I think that's one of the hardest things for women that are dealing with a mood disorder or a new onset of diagnosis, is like, if I could just try harder, if I would just try hard enough, it would be okay. I'd be fine. But I just have to try harder. It's actually one of the reasons I think that many women will say, I don't want to be on medication in pregnancy, because I just, it's for all the reasons that they give, which are not necessarily, ones that we, it's not what I want to highlight here. That's definitely a different conversation. Refer back to Dr. Rachel Schmutz's conversation with me on one of the earlier episodes around medication and pregnancy. But a lot of what we hear is, I'm just going to white knuckle. I should be able to do this on my own. And yet we would never say that to somebody who's a diabetic and be like, come on, pancreas, just kick in, just do a little bit better. And we would never consider that. You need insulin. And yet when it comes to our mental health, we really internally have this struggle of, I should be able to just get through this on my own, white knuckle my way through, get better, take control, get yourself together, girl, right? That idea and how we, and how that impacts the, like you said, that inner voice, and how that impacts our choices, what we say out loud, what we tell others, what we admit to.
I remember when my intake with the second psychiatrist I saw, I'm not exaggerating when I say I pretty much crawled in there. Or we could say my mother carried me in there. I was in bad shape. I was in really bad shape. And I remember at the end of the appointment, I still had that fighting voice of, is there something I could have done differently, that I could have just gotten better on my own? And he looked at me and in just such a straight face said, you could have gotten out of this yourself. No, there was no way out other than the right medication right now. And that to me, it didn't feel judgmental. It felt like a relief. Yeah. Okay. I tried it all. I ended up here shipwrecked on an island, and he's telling me the only thing that's going to get me out right now is the right medication.
Right.
That's
Oof.
it.
Right.
Relinquished.
And listen to that one voice, that one line that he probably didn't think twice about, but for you was a lifeline, right?
Yeah.
It was that confirmation of, I did everything I could, and I probably shouldn't have even had to have worked this hard, right, to get me in. I'm wondering, when you said, I'm curious because you said it a few times, this idea of like, I wasn't eating and you were malnourished for sure and vomiting. Was there anybody that was questioning you about this being a development of an eating disorder? I'm wondering if that was almost like a red herring. Did that ever like show up there as like a, hey, look over there, this is an eating disorder that's developing postpartum?
No,
No.
no. And I just remember being almost obsessed with the fact that I wasn't eating, like, like saying, this isn't normal. Can someone tell me why I can't eat?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What,
Right. I'm
no,
glad to hear that that was not something that was like people were paying more attention to that versus what was driving the underneath.
right, right.
Right.
No, no.
When you talk to me a little bit about like what it feels like now, how old is the baby? How old is that baby?
He is 6.
He is 6. So what does it feel like now to look back on that time?
So many different emotions. For a long time, there was a sense of grief that I feel like I really lost out on this opportunity, this, listen, I know that we've had our chance to bond. I know we've attached, thank God, in a very healthy way at this point, but we lost out on that in the first 16 months of his life. And that's a chunk of time. So I can't look at baby pictures from that time because I wasn't his mother during that time period. So there was a tremendous sense of grief around that. And I think I, had the ability to process that and let go of it. And I'm so grateful that I did get the opportunity at that point, once I did recover, to experience motherhood in a much deeper, much more exquisite way. I don't know if that's the right word to use, where I just had the opportunity at that point to bond with this toddler almost at that point, but to really experience what motherhood could feel like. And then that felt like a gift. So there are different time periods when I look back. The grieving was a really big part of it because, it was also at a stage in my life where this was, this is my last baby, and I missed out on the whole experience.
Yeah.
That was hard.
Yeah. The grief of what could have been. It's interesting. One of the things I have heard from women is this idea of like, I don't remember a lot of those early months. Was that something that you experienced? Or your memories are pretty intact?
My memories were pretty intact. Even when I started to not make sense as a reaction to some medications, when I may have been slipping into psychosis a little bit, I still remember all of that.
Mm-hmm.
They were really, yeah, I do have pretty strong memories of it.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to talk a little bit about what that memory is like about, in terms of slipping into psychosis or when you began to not make sense? Because I think that I think every feature that you're willing to share adds more knowledge and information to this conversation. So obviously, with whatever you choose to share with those that are listening, but I know that someone will hear this and say, okay, and she also got better, right? That same voice of like, wait, and she also may have experienced like, oh, that, and she got back into that carpal line, and she is raising a family, and she's running an organization, and she is well. So what would you like to expand on in terms of what I did not cover?
Just specifically with regards to that experience of slipping into psychosis, it's still, this better than me, the importance of differentiating what postpartum psychosis actually is and what I was experiencing in as an effective medication. That there is just a difference there, and I'm not saying it as a way of protecting myself. I'm saying it so that women understand just how dangerous real psychosis really is.
Right.
But the feeling of losing grip on reality was it was so crushing in a sense, because as mothers, we've worked, how many years was I married at that point? 17 years. All this work and all this energy, and you built this beautiful family. And I literally felt it slipping between my fingers, where I had this narrative in my mind at that point that this is it, I'm losing all of it.
Mhm.
My husband's going, taking the kids, packing up, he's out. You should meet my husband one of these days. He is the most committed patient. He wasn't going anywhere, but in my mind, it was an absolute reality, and nothing you could say to me was going to alter that. So I do remember talking to my parents and saying, like, you have to help me get the kids.
Oh, wow.
That wasn't based on any reality whatsoever.
Right.
It's just that feeling of like, you feel like you're losing it. You're losing it. You're losing everything you fought so hard to build. That experience. And then making peace with that new reality, right? Because in my mind, okay, this is the life I'm now going to have to lead. So you almost develop the skills to make peace with this new reality. And it's such...
Which is not a reality.
Exactly. So it's
Wow.
just such a devastating place to be in. But
And I imagine that it's hard to also kind of convince yourself that it's actually not true. Meaning, once you became well again and the medication stabilized you and you were more grounded in reality, you have to still convince yourself, no, he's really not leaving, and there's no evidence of that being true. Like, the brain has to kind of play catch up a little bit, right?
right. The brain had to play catch up. I feel like that happened faster for me than I would have thought.
Yeah.
That aspect happened faster, but functionality took a lot longer to get.
Right. Was there ever a talk of hospitalization? Was that ever a discussion?
Yes, there was right after Pesach, right after that timing, where I was so unable to take care of myself. There was a talk of hospitalization. I am grateful to this day that I wasn't. Not that hospitalization is a bad thing for someone who really would benefit from it. I was able to go to my parents' house. And for me, that was enough to be able to get into a different environment, tweak medication. Yes.
Safely.
Taken care of safely. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember at any point feeling suicidal? Was that ever part of the thoughts that you were having?
So it's interesting because I hear so many different things from different women around that. My feelings were much more of almost like I was devastated, that I kind of felt like that's just what I'm going to have to do. I can't survive like this, but I want to survive. But I want to be a mother. I want to take care of my kids. But it was a certain, during the deepest, darkest time, was a certain almost certainty that I'm not really going to have a choice, because I can't live like this.
Right.
So it wasn't a desire for suicidality. It was more of like, you're going to be left with no options.
I actually think that that's more common than you realize, meaning that that's actually more of the thought process. I don't think most people actively will choose to want to die by suicide. It's more like, I cannot continue to live with the pain or the life experience that I'm suffering with. And how painful and how powerful it is to hear you be able to remember those feelings and how concrete they were for you and how real.
Yeah.
What do you want women to know? And maybe I'm going to rephrase that a little bit differently. What are some of the misconceptions that you want, several misconceptions that are out there around perinatal moods and postpartum depression and anxiety? What are some of those misconceptions that you are actively, because I know you're actively working on, kind of blowing apart in the religious world, especially? What are some of those misconceptions?
I think even on a very mundane level, so to speak, like on the ground level, starting to change the narrative a little bit about what motherhood could feel like or actually is. And in reality, I don't know who created this new narrative of what things should be like, but it always took a village, still takes a village. You were never meant to pop that baby out and just manage and be okay. And I don't know why specifically in religious circles, it is a given that you will be able to manage, and you'll be able to manage it while looking beautiful and serving, a whole beautiful Shabbos and just being okay. So I vacillate between normalizing the difficulties postpartum, but also being very careful to say it's, like you mentioned racial schmutz, like it's not okay to not be okay.
Right.
There's a differentiation. Yet at the same time, normalizing a little bit how difficult the postpartum period is for most women.
Right.
For most women. And I love that Dove commercial that came out, the postpartum pressures. That was such a real gut-wrenching experience to watch that, because it's like, right, yes, this is what it looks like, not that Hallmark commercial. So a little bit,
Yes,
I feel like there's an importance there to empower young women and understanding that it's okay to reach out for help, even if you're not suffering to the degree of being dependent on help, but just needing help. It's okay. I want to be able to share that. And then to really share actual hardcore information. That to me was, and I always say, my husband and I were college educated individuals. It's not like we didn't have access to Dr. Google. Like I didn't know what to Google. So access to correct information has to be way more accessible. It should be talked about at a 6-week checkup. The pediatricians should be talking to the mothers with those newborns, especially the ones who are sitting and literally crying in your office. There has to be conversation. There has to be conversation. So I would love to see that change a little more, so women are not left trying to figure out what's going on their own.
Right.
And then there's the whole shame and stigma piece, which is so gargantuan, boulder to deal with.
Yeah.
But
it's changing. I mean, I think you're part of changing that narrative completely. Tell me, what are the things you've learned as you've launched Tikvaseinu? Like, what are the things you've learned about our community, maybe even, or about what we're prepared to hear or not prepared to hear? Or we know where the work needs to be done, that for sure. But like, what have you learned about since launching the program?
Even before the program fully launched, I remember hearing the words at certain providers when I was getting the care I needed. You don't realize how common this is. You don't realize how many women are suffering. And I was just like, well, you're selling me a bill of goods because I don't know anyone. I don't know anyone who has been through this. You keep telling me how normal it is. Now I don't believe you at all because I don't know anyone. And then people start coming out of the woodwork. And it's like, oh, her too? Oh, really? Oh. So the reality of what actually is going on just under the surface was so startling for me. And it was just, why does it have to be this way?
Yes.
Why does it have to be this way? So
Okay, can I just tell you one thing? Because I think it's so unbelievable. In one of my courses, I teach maternal mental health in a master's program. And one of the courses, I do the same prompt every year. And it's a prompt about, kind of the assumptions of motherhood, and women will write. Some of them are single women, some of them are married women, some have children, some do not. And we discuss, and they write like a personalized essay. In one of my classes of about 14 women, 5 of the 14 women had experienced their own perinatal diagnosable clinical level perinatal mood disruption in pregnancy and postpartum. 5 out of 14. That is way above the national average. And I know it's just a small, nondescript selected group of women, but it says to me that if 5 of these women of 14 were really suffering, and some of them got help and some of them just talked about the struggle and how hard it was, I'm like, we're onto something here, right? And so many of them said, I had no idea where to turn. I had no idea where to get the help that I need. So I think you're in, just like, I just have to say that out loud because it was shocking to me. And it was shocking to the women when I gave them that number. It's like, this is something that we need to keep doing more of because this is big.
And because you're so immersed in the world of perinatal health, you know all the resources. You know the whole infrastructure that's there. When you step out of that, when I was this outsider, I had no idea this whole world exists.
Right.
That bridge is so so necessary.
Right. Look, I think part of it is us not having a diagnosis in our DSM. Like there is no perinatal mood disorders in the DSM. I think that's our biggest, challenge yet to come. But I also think that the other piece is that we know this working within the religious community wants to see services in the religious community. Very often they want to see a religious therapist. They want to see a religious institution, organization, somebody refers them to a religious program. And because there are so few, really, really few, Tikvaseinu Yad Rachel being one of the onlys practically that are functional and active right now, right? It's really tough to make sure that everybody knows about those organizations. And I think that's where so much of the work is just, hey, we're here and we're going to continue to like scream it from the rooftops that we are
Right.
here.
Right. Call us.
Yeah.
Call us.
Right. Right.
I remember the first time I was exposed to PSI, to Postpartum Support International, was because I was looking for trainings. And I remember the first time I came across them, I really felt then also, wow, if I would have known about this for myself, it is not a religious organization, but it's an organization that understands exactly what's going on here.
Absolutely. You would have seen yourself in the literature, right? Like you would have said, oh, that was what okay. That's something that's familiar to me. You get it. Right.
Yes.
And what's fascinating is how many times I'll say PSI, and people are like, I'm sorry, say what does that mean again? What is that word again? I'm like, what? Household name,
Right?
For sure.
Right?
For sure. Tell us a little bit as we close out today. I'd love to hear from you again. Tell me what Tikvaseinu is actively doing right now and what's your vision for the future?
So Tikvaseinu actively, thank God, has our operating helpline with 3 to 4, I answer at some certain timeframes, women who are trained to be able to answer that phone, to be able to support a woman through a conversation, to be able to give them information, and also be able to give them a referral to a qualified therapist and medication provider if needed. And the biggest piece there is that we just don't stop at referral. We are there to hold a woman's hand to make sure that they actually follow through from referral to appointment and that there is an appointment available for them. So many qualified specialists just don't have space anymore. And we worked really hard to try to make sure that we could expedite that process and make sure there is a spot waiting for them and that they're getting the care they need. So it's really a combination of just being here in a compassionate way. I know for myself what it felt like to finally speak to somebody who knew what was going on. So I see the value of that for so many calls that my co-supervisors take of just the relief that you hear in a woman's voice. I'm like, oh, you can help me.
Yes.
You understand. So we've accomplished that. And that took me a long time to get off the ground just because it was so important to me to make sure that we all got proper training in answering that phone call. That to me was just my battle cry. Like, I just wanted to know we were ready. We were ready. As a matter of fact, it had to be pushed to finally launch, to finally put that phone number out. The person who was helping me get organized was like, you need to launch. Like, no, one more training. No, you need to launch. So
like now.
Yeah.
By the way, what is that phone number? We'll put it in the podcast notes, but what is that phone number?
845-827-9009. And very often people will get a message and not a live person answering the phone. It's very important that when a supervisor does answer the phone, there is designated time for her to speak to that woman. So it's not like, hi, thanks for calling, I'll call you back. When you're actually answering the phone, you have time to answer. So we have specific hours of the helpline, but if a woman calls and does leave a message, within a few hours, she'll get a call back.
Okay.
No one's just left stranded.
Are you asking that it be from the New York metro area, or are you saying New York only? Are you asking for only Monsey? Do you have restrictions at this point?
So from the helpline perspective, we've had calls from all over the world, honestly, and we're here to offer support to anybody who needs it. You know, we're not saying only Monsey people can call. The reality is that the real path to healing is going to be from the right providers, and you need that social worker / medication provider. So from a referral perspective, we are staying local. We have access to local providers. So, you know, when people call from Cincinnati, LA, London, we're here to support you, of course, but it's, you know, we can't guide them through the recovery process because they need to be able to access their own providers.
Right. And so good.
Yeah.
Okay. And your vision for the future, what do you hope it will be?
My vision for the future really, hopefully, is to be able to create a center, a place for people to be able to come and get everything they need. during that road to recovery, everything from therapy to medication to yoga to massage therapy, like just a place where a woman can go and feel safe and held, and everything she needs is right there.
I love it.
Good to
I
dream.
love it. I love it. Let's dream big. Let's dream big.
Yeah.
Elke, thank you so much for agreeing to talk with us today, for sharing your story. It takes courage. It really is. It's brave. And I know, because of the feedback that I will get and will eventually share with you, that people will hear your story and will say, like, that was me and I didn't get the help I needed, or that was me and I'm so thankful I did get the help I needed. But people will hear themselves in your story. And I know it is going to help people in the long run. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's always